Welcome to the first actual lecture of this course. Now, there is a very good chance that this course is your very first contact with any web development and any programming in general. And so, before we actually start building our project, I think it might be a good idea to begin this course with a very high-level overview of the field of web development. So we're going to talk about things like the browser and the server, requests and responses, front-end and back-end web development, and of course about the core languages of the web. So buckle up and let's get started. So here's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to see what happens when we open up a web page in a browser, and based on that, I will briefly explain how the web works and how web development fits into the picture. So let's say that we're trying to access a web page in our browser at udemy.com. Now what happens as we access this page is that our browser will send a request to the server where this page is hosted on the internet. So each and every website is stored on something called a server, which is basically a computer that is connected to the internet and that is able to receive requests like this one. So again, when we browse to a certain website, our browser will send a request to the server where the website is stored, so where it is hosted. Then, when the server receives the request, it will take all the files that make up the website and send them back to the browser. And so we say that the server sends a response to the browser, which essentially contains all of these files that the website is made of. Now, as you can see from these file extensions, we have some HTML, CSS, and also JavaScript code here. And these are precisely the three languages that browsers can understand. So what this means is that all of the code that makes up a website needs to always be written in the languages HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Because, again, these are essentially the three core technologies that any browser can understand. But what do I actually mean by understand? Well, it means that once the browser receives these HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files from the server's response, it will take the code and render the website based on that code. So browsers are able to produce a visual output based on the code that we write as developers, which is pretty cool. And with this, you already have a good understanding of what happens when we browse to a website and also about the technologies that we use to build websites. Now, this visual output that we can see in the browser, so the final rendered website, is what we call the front end of a website. Therefore, the process of writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code is a process that we call front-end web development. So whenever you hear someone talking about front-end development, what they mean is developers writing the code that is displayed in the browser, so which is basically the front end of the website. And in fact, this is mostly what we're going to learn in this course, at least the very fundamentals of it. Okay, now as you can imagine, if there is a website front end, then there is also a back end. And the backend is basically the invisible part of a website, so the part that users will actually never see. Usually, a website's backend contains an application that is running on the server, along with a database that contains all the data that is necessary to power the website or the web application. Now, not all websites require a backend, but as soon as they need some data in order to work, some kind of backend will be necessary. Take the example of udemy.com that we're analyzing here. It's a very complex site that is always changing, so there are lots of things that always need to be done. New courses and reviews need to be added to a database, ratings and course length need to be calculated and updated, and so on. So, again, in order to take care of all this, there is some huge backend application running on Udemy's server that is capable of getting and adding data to a database, processing that data, creating files, and also of sending things to users' browsers. And I'm saying things here because web servers can not only send HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, as we learned initially, but also just raw data. So, in other words, a browser can also just request some raw data, and the server will then get the data from the database and send it as a response to the user's browser. And I know this probably all sounds super confusing and complicated, but don't worry. You don't need to understand all this 100% in order to take this crash course. Again, this is just to give you an overview of how things work in the world of web development. But anyway, to do all these things on the backend, front-end technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are simply not enough. They are not able to do advanced stuff like connecting to a database, at least not HTML and CSS. So, in order to write backend applications, developers use some backend language like Node.js, PHP, Python, or even some other tool. There are many available. And the process of writing backend applications using one of these tools is called, as you can imagine, backend development. Now, in the real world, most applications require both a front-end and a back-end. And in that case, we say that the application is a full-stack application. And actually, the name of this course says exactly that we're going to build a full-stack app, which means that we're going to work a bit on back-end development as well. But rest assured that it's going to be extremely simple. All right, and now just to finish, let's take a closer look at the three languages of the front end. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as they are particularly important. So starting with HTML, we use HTML to write the actual content of the page. So that's the text, the images, the buttons, and all the content that you can see on a web page. So all that content is always written in HTML. Then we have CSS, which is responsible for the presentation of that content. So basically for styling and for laying out the elements on a web page in a logical way. And finally, we have JavaScript, which is the actual programming language of the front end. So it's the only programming language that browsers can actually understand. So JavaScript allows us to add dynamic and interactive effects to web pages. So we can use it to respond to user events, to manipulate the content or the CSS, to load data from web servers, and even to build entire front-end web applications. And actually, this is exactly what we're going to do in this course. So we're going to use all these three core web technologies, plus some other tools, in order to build the web application that I showed you in the course introduction. Okay, and with that, we finish this intro to web development and are now ready to start working on our amazing course project. So let's move on now.